here for a special Thursday edition of Executive Forums. As I told you at the beginning of the semester, we're very fortunate here in Boca to have business leaders from a variety of industries, a variety of backgrounds, all coming in. So at this point in your master's degree programs, you can hear from people who are leaders in their firms and in their industries and learn from their variety of experiences. And so tonight, we have a leader in the financial services industry. Jackie Reeves is Managing Director of Bell Rock Capital. She is a native of New York, growing up on Long Island, worked in New York City, worked down here in South Florida, commuted back and forth for a number of years. She is someone you might see on television if you're watching the business news channel, CNBC, Bloomberg, other things. So it's a great opportunity for you to get to see her here in person and keep an eye out for her on TV. Her commentary is sought out about developments in financial markets, what's happening in the economy, and a variety of those things. She has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and various other printed media. She is also a leader in our business community. I've seen her at a number of events, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce, the YMCA board. She serves on numerous boards of directors, and I think she's one of those people that when folks get to know her, they're more and more impressed and always want her to serve in a leadership capacity in their organization. She also doesn't mind having fun. I think one of the things she did, didn't you win the Mirror Ball Trophy, which is another way of sort of saying dancing with the business stars here. And so we're very, very fortunate to have her here. She is, as I say, a leader in the business community here in South Florida, a leader in the social community. Please join me in welcoming Jackie Reeves.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that warm introduction. I want to make sure I start off right off the bat saying I want to make this as extremely interactive as possible. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to do my best to kind of tell my story as I've journeyed to where I am today. But at any point in time, raise your hand. During the presentation, I'll be asking all of you some questions as well to make this more interactive. This is your time as well as my time, and I want to make sure you get out of it the most possible. Early on in my career, as a research analyst, research is near and dear to my heart. One of my clients was very fond of saying, just start asking her questions. It's amazing what she knows because she just won't really go out and kind of just fill in all the gaps. So it's really all about kind of that stories. Let me actually do this. There we go. So I don't know about you, but I like to get centered. On the way here, I got stuck by the train. Somebody may have cut you off, and I just want to make sure kind of we're all present in the room and kind of waiting, and anticipating what's going to happen next. And it actually reminded me of a story a few years ago, kind of as Dean Gropper was saying. I served on a lot of boards. Right now, I still serve on plenty across the community, which I'll talk about, but it used to be a lot more. And New Year's came along, and I'm not really big on New Year's resolutions, but this year I said, you know what? I'm going to make sure I'm present. I'm going to try and do my best over the next few years to stop saying yes. So I am a recovering volunteer addict. I definitely want to help as much and as many people as possible, as many organizations as possible. And it often starts something like this. Jackie, we need somebody for finance. Because I don't know, obviously there might be a lot of finance people in here, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of us when they're going around the room asking for somebody to be the treasurer or to look over their books or serve on the endowment board. So watch out, because that's going to be coming your way. And I would always be like, oh, sure, it's only an hour a quarter or an hour in a month. And so you're like, okay. And then all of a sudden you turn around and it's like you're on 10 boards. And that's just really not feasible. So that year I made a commitment to myself, a commitment to my family, a commitment to my business to start saying no. And as the board positions started coming up for, you know, kind of terming out, or, you know, are you going to say yes again for another 2 or 3 years, I just started to say no. So I want to just impose upon all of you that if you are overscheduling yourself, just think about where to say no, how to say no, and how to be really present in a meeting, and how to really listen, because that's the other thing that really started happening after I made that decision. We all talk about multitasking and what are we going to do and how much can we get done really in this session or everything else. And you know, there's a phone sitting here, and oh, I might check this or I might do that. But if you really start listening to your colleagues, to your professors, to your boss, to your clients, it really makes a difference. And it makes a difference in your presentation. So while I have a presentation here, we can take really any tangent we all want. Because it's your time, it's our time, we want to figure out what best to get out of it. And then the other thing too is you're sitting there with your clients and your future clients. Sometimes we get so caught up in what we want to say and what product or service we're trying to pitch, because you know our boss is over here and we've got goals and we've got to do this and we've got to do that, that we forget to listen to what our client really needs and what that hot button issue really is. So kind of this is, try and get centered, try and figure out, you know, what that is for you. And then this is a really brief overview of kind of how I've sketched out the evening, but like I said, we're up for, you know, any kind of tangent that anybody really wants to take. And then next, okay, who wants to dream big? All right, awesome. I want to share my experiences with all of you, because I hope that you can take some of those lows I've experienced, some of the highs I've experienced, and really learn from that, maybe not go as low as I've gone sometimes, and have even higher highs. You know, we want to make sure we have the entrepreneurs in the room who wants to start their own companies, all right. Those people that want to be in the C-suites, you know, eventually of some companies, all right. You know, that's all out there for those really, really big dreams. No matter what it is, you can accomplish it. And sometimes, you know, when we're thinking about those big dreams and being a leader or anything else, some people are like, well, I don't know if I want to really be the leader. But think of it a little differently, because leader in itself doesn't mean that you have to be in charge of 100 people or 10 people or 5 people. Leadership really means being in charge of yourself and what you really want to do with your life and with your goals. So it doesn't have to be as big as sometimes leadership is thrown out there to be. It's up to you. And then I look at my life and my path as a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so the first picture up here is about, you know, sometimes we're going to fall down. And we all know that it's not that you fell down, it's how you're going to pick yourself up and the next steps you're going to take to make sure you get back on that path. And then also, you know, sometimes it's going to be really ugly out there. And you're going to be trudging along and doing the best you can, but you might only be able to look 3 feet in front of you to kind of get through that next week and those challenges that are in front of you. And then sometimes you're just going to have to take a little step off to the side, stretch out, take a little breath, and that's okay. And then also, sometimes you're going to find yourself, you're like, where is that road? What happened? How did I get over here? You know, I need to climb back up and get on that road again, and that's good too. And then sometimes you're going to just hit the ball out of the park. You're going to have like the best week ever, the best year ever. You're going to hit major goals and everything else, and take those victories and also celebrate those victories. I'm guilty of it too. You know, I'll have a big client win, I'll do something absolutely awesome, and I'll just be like, oh yeah, great, great, and then just kind of get back to work. But you know what? Take the time out and celebrate that victory. Take a day off, take a weekend off, you know, whatever it is that, but really be mindful of that. Yes?
Sure. So, kind of personal question, I guess, is I've learned like life throws you curveballs, and you know, as part of acquisitions, my company's going to end up laying me off. You know, in the next few months, it's the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
What point do you know, take the break, and what really makes you make the decision, okay, this is where I'm going to go now?
Yeah. So a few things. So I've been part of a lot of M&A transactions, which you'll see shortly. One of them in particular, I was not sure I wanted to go with that company. So but I was also then at a crossroads because it was a point where I'm like, I know I really love what I'm doing, but now I have a choice because I don't really want to go with that company, but I'm not really sure of those other paths in front of me. So I took, I'll say, a few weeks off. Mind you, I have 2 children. I didn't even really take off during pregnancy. So the 3 weeks was like a major takeoff for me to just try and figure out what I wanted to do next and who I wanted, probably more importantly, who I wanted to do it with. So, so I would suggest that at the very least, to be mindful of that. And then obviously the other thing is economics, right? Some people, you might not be able to, or you can take off longer time than that and maybe even get out of the country and just kind of, so just as an aside too, a few weeks ago at the end of the summer, my daughter and I went and did a tiny, tiny portion of the Appalachian Trail. And I just have to say, that was amazing. I had thoughts of something even bigger because I called up trying to think of a person who takes you on the hikes, a guide, right? Because I wasn't about to go on the Appalachian Trail by myself. But I'm thinking, oh, let's go do a few days, just get out of the wood, just go back to nature and figure out what's happening and just regroup. And I called up the company and just checked opportunities. And I'm sounding like I really know what I'm doing. And so she's like, well, how much of a hiker are you? I'm like, oh God, I've never hiked. So they're like, okay, you know what? You might just want to do like a day hikes, stay in a hotel and then come back and we'll just do some day hikes. But something like that might be good to kind of just clear your mind. And yeah, my pleasure, my pleasure. And then, kind of going on this marathon theme some more is a lot of people go it alone. You're going through life. Maybe you have a dear friend that you can share everything with, but maybe not everything. But this one is just to say, you know what, sometimes when we're going through the race of life, we need to reach out to our friends and our colleagues, times our bosses, and just say, you know what, I need help. I don't understand what's happening here. I need some clarity. I need more communication. I need more direction. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And then kind of this last one here is, it seems like it might be similar to the rain, but this is about, that entrepreneurial spirit. Maybe kind of like you're looking for that next thing. You're kind of going down the road. This is, for me, beautiful, because I do love winter. I grew up in New York, but now I can, frankly, live down here and go fly to winter and then come back. But you're going it alone, and there's nobody there with you yet. But you have this dream. You have this idea, and it's awesome. So sometimes you're going to be on that beautiful road all by yourself for a little while, maybe sometimes a long time, but it's still a great road, and you should keep going on it. So this is the beginning kind of my story. I grew up in a blue-collar family on Long Island. My dad was taken out of school kind of during the Depression to go to work for the family and support the family in high school. My mom did go to college, university for a while in Manhattan to art school. And I'm one of 4 children. And I was the only one to graduate college. And I initially went to school, grew up on Long Island, and that was near Brookhaven National Labs. So I was really studying to be an engineer. And I was involved in a lot of nuclear kind of radiation testing with Brookhaven Labs. Go figure. So when I went to school, I really wanted to do nuclear engineering and genetic engineering. And it wasn't until, and I did that actually for the first few years of study. And then I had some internships. So I have to be really thankful, which is actually why I'm interested and still involved right now with FAU and internship programs. That changed my life because I had an internship program with Merrill of all places during school. And the person at Merrill Lynch, who was a really big bond guy in Allentown, Pennsylvania, had me doing all of his research. So I was calling all these companies, I was looking through annual reports, 10Ks, 10Qs, you name it, getting all the research, trying to figure out which particular bonds to buy. It's not for everybody, but for me, that was like candy. And that was my calling. So I switched then from genetic engineering, nuclear medicine, to business. And I think the hardest thing for me was telling my parents. Because I remember going home and I was like, you know, how do I tell them I'm switching my major? What's going to happen? They're going to be so disappointed. But literally, I think however I was teeing it up, when I talked to them, they thought I was going to quit school. So I was just telling them I was switching majors, and they're like, oh, that's fine. Whatever you want to do. But internships, how many people have done, you know, kind of all the internships? Well, they're fantastic. Did that change kind of your direction or your career path? Anyone?
I did, my first graduate degree was in exercise physiology.
Okay.
And I was doing strength and conditioning for the first chunk of my life, and then the second internship I had was with Baptist South Florida.
Okay.
Working with clinical populations. And then that made me change which way of exercise phase I was going to go.
Gotcha.
Instead of doing strength and conditioning, I started working with metabolic conditions.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
so it changed.
Anybody else change kind of your direction or further kind of cement? Do you want to share your story?
Well, I was initially in education major.
Okay.
Through internship and then realized that it wasn't for me.
Wasn't your thing. Yeah. Anyone else want to?
I was actually in law school and I did an internship for a law office and I hated it.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important. Anybody else want to share?
So I went to a small advertising company and to start everything, and I realized I need to go to like a global company, you know, to be more like professional. So that's kind of like changed my mindset and to a full people company.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I switched myself.
Fantastic, fantastic. The other thing to think about, kind of to your earlier question, as people are transitioning from one maybe career or one job to another, and maybe if they have the luxury to be able to really take some time off, and obviously I'm a recovering volunteer addict, I know, but volunteering for certain industries or companies, because there's a ton of nonprofits out there that are big organizations. And so to be able to maybe volunteer within one of those organizations to get additional skills and training and frankly contacts and networking is huge. So that's kind of another thing I might throw out as well. So I interned at Merrill Lynch in Pennsylvania, and like I said, with the big bond guy, and now I'm like, oh my God, Wall Street, I've got to get to New York, I've got to do all these wonderful things. It happened to be at a time when we were going through, I'll just say, a small recession. So an opportunity maybe to move to kind of join Merrill Lynch in Manhattan in the research area, because now I'm like firmly planted on I need to go do research and Wall Street research. And again, I grew up in a blue collar family. Stocks and bonds was not part of our dinner conversation. So I was reading the Wall Street Journal and I was reading all sorts of periodicals that I could get my hands on to try and learn more and more about what was going on here. Probably if I had given it really any great deal of thought, you probably surmise by now, I live in positivity. So, anybody else would have been like, what is she thinking? She has no background here. She knows no one in this field. How can she possibly think that this is going to happen? But I was so driven, and I was so convinced that this is where I was headed, that there was no one that was going to stop me. And I have to tell you, this is during the time, like right after it, if you will, of like the Wolf of Wall Street. So I'm trying to jump into Wall Street in the late 80s. So I was actually interning during the crash of '87. And so that's what's happening. And then we have all these penny stock companies and stuff that's going on that if you've seen the movie, how many have seen Wolf of Wall Street? All right? So it's crazy. And I'm interviewing and all this, and I'm like, oh my God, like this is nothing like the guy I interned with in Pennsylvania. What is going on here? So eventually I did join Merrill Lynch, not on the research side because like I said, they were downsizing dramatically. I am like the Diamond District at Merrill Lynch on the retail side. A great training ground, great kind of first thing for your resume, great builder, everything else. And so for the first, I'll say 4 years or so, immerse myself in Merrill Lynch, everything Merrill. Worked for the sales director and all sorts of brokers in the firm. I learned several things. So kind of like you're jumping in, what's going on? I can make 300 phone calls in about 2 hours. Okay, so cold calling 101. I mean, it's amazing when you're asked to do something and when you're going to get measured by something, how many phone calls you can make in a short period of time. So we were cold calling basically for a lot of business accounts in New York City. And I remember one story, because I'm, 22, maybe 23. And I'm cold calling at night because that's what you do with the businesses because they're working late and you're trying to get all these business accounts. And I'm like, okay, we'd love to invite you to a seminar. It's a working cash management account. Can you come? And all of a sudden, this guy blows up on me. I'm a Merrill client. I can't believe you're calling me. I can't believe you don't know who I am, all this other stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be fired. This is horrible. And I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry. I'll let somebody know to take you off the list or whatever. I hang up the phone. I go into my boss's office, and I tell him the story. And he's like, don't worry about it. It's fine. He's not leaving. He's not going anywhere. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I am rattled to my core. Because this one guy just chewed me a new one, and I don't even know what's going to happen after this. And he's like, no. So to then pick yourself up after a beating like that and just get back on the phone, okay? So I can call just about anybody, which I continue to do later in another portion of my career. And then the other thing is, one of my future bosses was a current client at Merrill Lynch. So this gentleman is a research analyst, which is what I want to do. He happens to be a client of one of the brokers, and he's in the oil industry. So we're talking on the phone, and this is after a few years. He knows this is not really where I want to be. And apparently, I won't let him off the phone until he makes a trade. So he really likes that about me. And he's like, listen, Jackie, I'm going to be moving from this firm to another firm, Rothschild out of London. When I get there, I'll hire you. So I'm like, this is awesome. I can finally get to my research. It's with a client. So I can't think of a better way to go from one firm to another, especially on Wall Street, because you're really not burning any bridges. You're going to a client. So obviously in Merrill, for people that might not know, now I'm firmly in the retail side at Merrill Lynch. I'm going to be moving over to the institutional side. You would think this shouldn't be a problem for kind of anyone, but one. So I go to tell my boss that I'm leaving, and courtesy, you give 2 weeks notice and everything else. She is livid, absolutely livid. I mean, I'm going to a client. She's like, you will never work on Wall Street again. And so I'm like 23, I'm thinking, can she do this? Is that possible? And I couldn't imagine. I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, she's this is one of the best, biggest Merrill Lynch kind of offices in Manhattan. Maybe it's possible. Maybe she has the power to kind of cut my career short. And I'm not a crier, but I remember sitting there going, I don't cry. And then years later, kind of as I reflect back on that, the one other thing is, there were not a lot of women kind of in that situation, in that firm at the time. This one woman that has a very powerful position, sadly, I'm not a threat. I'm not going to, Smith Barney or Payne Weber, whoever it was at the time. I'm going to a client. She could have had a different path and instead lifted me up rather than kind of stuffing me down. So I just want to encourage everybody to kind of look for that mentor, look for that other person, give them a hand up rather than trying to kind of step on them when they're down. So that's the other Merrill story, just as a sidebar. I had was talking to clients all around the country, and it kind of made me think. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to get out of the retail space. But one of the clients called; they were out of money in one of their accounts, but they had other accounts, so I kind of just had to move things around. And I'm talking to the person on the phone, and they were just like, "I don't understand. I have checks." So I'm like, what? Like, what do you say to that? I still have checks in my checkbook, but they didn't understand, right? Nobody in the account. It doesn't matter how many checks you have in your checkbook. So I was like, all right, I've got to get out of here. This little sidebar. You just never know who's going to be on the phone. What do you have to deal with? But nonetheless, kind of funny. So Wall Street, that was my other goal. So kind of the measurement of research for Wall Street is Greenwich polls and II, and you kind of want to be at the top of the heap on those. So I had my sights set on that. And then, you know, if you're in the securities industry, you know about them. These are all the licenses I've had. Some of them I still have, which I'll explain. But the litany of all those, which was a joy to get all those. And then, so I did journey over with my oil analyst client over to Rothschild. It was right in Rockefeller Plaza, gorgeous location. We overlooked, you know, the tree, and it was just fabulous. We worked with the Rothschild out of London. I mean, how much better can it get? I traveled, so I just started, you know, working everywhere. I was also, did oil, I did trucking, I did pharmaceuticals. We hired a syndicate guy. I was working on M&A activity within the small syndicate, so they just sent me to meetings everywhere, which was fantastic. I'm a big hockey fan. Any hockey fans, anyone? All right. So grew up on Long Island during the dynasty of the Islanders. One of the gentlemen that I worked with, so in addition to research, I also, of course, do sales. I mean, everybody's always in sales. We had the Waldorf Astoria for the ice hockey team of Harlem that we raised money for every year. And the salesperson that I worked with was on the gold luge team for Canada. And so he chaired this event every year. And so then all of a sudden I became the person to help them with this week-long entertainment frenzy for the Ice Hockey Hall of Famers. And you might not notice him because I'm standing in front of him, but the guy behind me in the picture, in addition to me having and touching the Stanley Cup, is Ken Dryden, who's a Hall of Famer goaltender. So I just had so much fun. And also the point here is you're networking, right? So I left Merrill, sadly not on good terms with Linda, who was the boss, but every other person in the firm, we just had great relationships for. I go work with my client. Now I'm, you know, hobnobbing with all of these Ice Hockey Hall of Famers, and also on the institutional side, I get to know my bosses at Rothschild were just amazing. They were mentors, like I said. They let me do kind of whatever you wanted to do because they were a small firm, so they needed you to wear as many hats as you could possibly put on, which was phenomenal. Obviously worked in Manhattan. And then from there, I got a cold call, to go work with an II ranked analyst. So on my first page, you know, research is really important to me. Now I'm going to focus. So I've been a junior analyst in like every single industry but banking, and that's the call I got. So, but I can talk my way through a lot of things. I am a quick study. So I joined Credit Suisse. The II ranked analyst was moving from Solomon for like the first time in 20 years, and he needed to rebuild his whole entire team. So from the first day I walked into Credit Suisse, I got there at like 7 in the morning. When you work in New York, you're in at 7 or 6:30 in the morning. I didn't leave till 11 at night for 3 years. Okay? I didn't know the banking industry. And anybody who's working in the banking industry knows it is a completely different language than any other industry out there. So self-study. Basil's up there because at the time, now I probably at Smith Barney, but I was one of on a team to help work on these initial Basel Accords. So that was really cool. I was flying on private jets out of Teterboro with the banking space, all the CEOs, Jamie Dimon, as well as just a number of key players in the industry, also down here at the time too. I had the corner office, everything's great. I'm just traveling, M&A activity. And then I put this slide here on the M&A deals because this is a kind of a picture of what the banking space had been going through. But my job was to model every single deal, every single quarter going out, probably a good 5 years or so. And we were on the first team to do EVA analysis also to the banking space as well as the insurance space. I had to model in deal flow after deal flow anticipated for corporate finance. I hit the end of an Excel spreadsheet. Did you know you could do that? So it's just, I was in my glory. I loved doing what I was doing. In fact, I still do. When you're doing that M&A activity, you're up all night. So, and then, right? How many people have been blindsided? Anybody? Right? So, I'm definitely living my dream. I'm traveling. I'm at some pretty great firms. I'm working with some dynamic people. I'm meeting awesome people all over the country. In fact, it got to the point in my travel schedule that for the first 3 seconds when I woke up in the morning, I didn't know what city I was in. But I was fine with that because that was part of what I wanted to do. But as I was looking around, and it creeps in, like it's a crevice, it's a big hole, but I'm looking around my industry, and some people are, like, this is what a typical day. I would come in at 7 or so in the morning. There's a call at 7:30 down on the trading floor. As a research analyst, you go in and you pitch your idea. Go ahead. This is mid-90s. Yep. And so I'm there pitching my idea in the morning to this institutional sales team. And then you kind of go up and make another 300 phone calls, frankly, before. You're supposed to make all of your phone calls before the market opens. So 7:30 call in the morning to all the institutional guys. By 9:30, 9:15, hopefully 9, you're off the calls for all of your clients. People were trading ahead of those research changes. So I would go down in the morning. Some people, when they were making a recommendation change, say from a hold to a buy, they would be trading before that and obviously capitalizing on those changes before they would have said it in that morning meeting. So that was happening. The other thing that was happening is the deal flow that I initially mentioned on the prior slide. People would know, because they worked on the deal, that it was coming, whether it would tank the stock for a little bit and then obviously rise. And they were trading on that information as well. And they were trading it in such a way, sometimes it was obvious, but at that point it technically wasn't illegal, or they were using options to achieve the same strategy without actually trading the underlying stock. And then the other thing that was happening, because if you were a really good, great research analyst, you might have been writing the press releases of the earnings reports for the company. And so, like I said, little by little, all of these things are happening, and they're not certainly happening all at once. The other thing that was happening is that corporate finance, was asking, if not demanding, that as a research analyst, you were covering specific companies. And if that wasn't enough, it had to be a buy. Couldn't be a hold. Certainly couldn't be a sell, because then we wouldn't get the corporate finance deals. In fact, I'm pregnant with my first child, and I finished all my stuff ahead. She happened to come early, but nonetheless, I'm about to give birth. I get a call from corporate finance that they're flying to Texas to pitch a deal. Now, you might ask, why is she taking a call? Well, she's delivering a baby. That is another weakness of mine. I tend to just work. But they wanted me to upgrade the stock because they were going to pitch the deal in Texas. And they wanted to go in there with a firm footing so that they could say what was going on. So, you know, I really thought when I joined these respective firms, I definitely had my dreams, but all of a sudden the realities of the economics of what was happening, the laws at the time, they just really didn't align with my own values. So wouldn't it be nice if all of a sudden you kind of you're on the road and you take a curve or something and it just says challenges ahead? It would make it much, much easier to deal with. But sadly, it's not that simple. So these are some of the items that were happening. One time, I'm trying to think if it was exactly one time. The time I can remember, I followed a bank in the Midwest. And of course, I'm still working till 11 or 12 at night. And I'm on the phone with the CFO. And it becomes painfully clear that my buy recommendation is not appropriate. In fact, it becomes painfully clear that a hold isn't appropriate either, because this company is going to miss earnings. And there's stuff going on there that's just not good. So I feverishly write my note, because now I've got to go down the next morning to the 7:30 call and tell everybody the story and what's going on at this company, and that we've got to get out. We've got to get our clients out, everything else. So I execute this. And kind of the bigger picture here is that I can't do this alone. Like, it has to go to compliance, and all that stuff has to happen. So it does. But now I'm ready to go on the call the next day at 7:30 in the morning. And I execute this. And I call all the clients. I do everything I have to do by 9 o'clock the next morning. And everybody's like, oh my God, the stock is tanking, you know. And I get the call. And they're like, Jackie? I'm like, what? Like, we need you to find some reason to make this a hold and to upgrade the stock. And I'm like, what? You know, it's just incredible what's happening. And so, you know, can figure out what to do. If it's tanking enough, the valuation alone is going to get you to a lower PE. So there's ways to skirt around that. But it's just screaming different ways and what's happening of all this. And I did, you know, during my first pregnancy, I'll share for those of you who might experience this or may have already experienced it. It's better, but we know it's not where it needs to be for the females who want to have a family. The men who want a family and take paternity leave. The U.S. is horrible, horrible at this, and it was certainly worse when I was delivering my children. But there was a situation where we were we were almost going to be moving from one firm to another. And I was doing some business out in Tennessee, and I was supposed to get a contract to stay with our current firm on that Saturday morning. So Saturday morning came and went, nothing happened. I got to the office on that Monday, and still no contract. I'm 5 months pregnant. I go in to see the research director, and I'm like, hey, you know, what's going on? We had a deal. It was my senior partner. I was kind of a two-team, and we had like 9 people on our team. We were literally going to lift out and go to Lehman or wherever it was. And they're like, oh, you know, it was really only for so-and-so and not you. I'm like, really? Because that's not what was explained to me. So part of kind of those crevices, that was like one thing in my head. I'm like, all right, nothing changed on my comp, but you just didn't kind of have that guarantee for the next 2 years. But just one more thing to kind of stick in your cap in terms of what's going on there. And then kind of like what you were just saying, I went through the big soul searching. What do I want to do? Is this really an industry I want to be a part of? What is going on here? This is crazy land. So what I decided to do was move, like I still love research, I still do it today. It's the crux and core and foundation of where I am now. So I tried smaller broker-dealers for a little while, and what I found out is they were really just smaller. They still had the conflicts, they still had the challenges. There was a little bit more flexibility because frankly you're in a honeymoon period as you're coming in the door, but it still wound up being the same thing. But I knew I still wanted to do the research part. So I started a list. And the list was really for my next firm, not for me. I knew what my list was and I knew what my core values were. One of the firms actually on the small broker-dealer that I stayed with for quite a while, when I went to interview with the director of research, and a tip here for everybody else, obviously, as you're going through the interview processes, is I didn't realize it, but I was asking so many questions because of the stuff I had been through at prior firms that all of a sudden the director of research was like, I feel like I'm being interviewed. He was a little awkward. I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry. I'm like, I just have a ton of questions about what happens here. But really make sure you follow your moral compass. And I'm going to get to kind of the point later, and obviously many of you who kind of have read history about what happened and what was going on. But no one can take away your integrity. You know, they can strip away and chop away at some other things, but as long as you have that and maintain that as your central core, that will always, always be with you. And also try and figure out if that company has the same culture. Different companies that I'm working with now, more as clients, it's just vastly different from one company to another in the culture. You know, you can really feel it from that interview process. Get there a little early, maybe sit in the waiting room for a little while, get a feel for who's coming in the door, even volunteer. This way you can really get to know that company ahead of time. It'll save you a lot of time down the road because you don't want to, I mean, obviously I've taken jobs that you have to take because you got to pay the bills, you know. But longer term to make a career and everything else, that's really different. And I was so focused on trying to find a firm that was conflict free. So at the end, I'm going to show you all the logos. But I have, and it's funny, the way it worked in the research side, you stayed pretty much 3 or 4 years at different firms, and then ultimately somebody got really pissed at their bonus, and the slot opened up, and then there was like musical chairs. So you kind of did the same thing, just with a different logo. But I'm going to say probably about 10. So I found Bell Rock Capital through a friend of mine who we worked together at one of the broker-dealers. And the story with Bell Rock is it's a registered investment advisor, and it's out of Delaware. We now have offices, obviously, here in Florida, as well as Pennsylvania and New Jersey, as well as California. As Dean Gropper mentioned, we do get on CNBC. Here are some quotes in some areas. And that actually started way back, I'll say I've thankfully been asked back on the show for a good 20 years. So initially in my early career, I got training for media training. So I know how to talk in sound bites. I know how to be on NPR if we have a 15-minute or 20-minute segment, but you really have to visualize that because you're amazed. It's just freaky what people can say. We are firmly on the fiduciary side of the equation, so that kind of little bump over on the right versus suitability, which can be some more of the brokerage side. It's a big distinction. And then, you know, on some of the earlier notes, we had kind of that work-life balance. As I mentioned before, if I'm taking phone calls while I'm delivering, I probably don't have a very good work-life balance. But I look at more, maybe it's a seesaw of approach. You know, there's clearly times in our life when I've been firmly, firmly focused on work. Thankfully, my husband, we met in college, he was a trader. So the good thing was his hours really ended when the market closed, so he could be home, and he was a great cook. So it worked out great. He could take care of the kids, be home a little early, and I worked late at night. But that work-life balance, I look at it pretty much more of a universal work-life balance. My parents, love them dearly. They are part of my work-life balance. So they moved back up from Florida to New Jersey to take care of my daughter. And then 2 years later or 3 years later, when I'm like, do you want to move back down to Florida? They're like, sure. So I look at that work-life balance more of a community approach. If your family's there, I hired a nanny with my second daughter, but whatever you have to do to really make it work, you do. It's really hard because I did travel a tremendous amount. As I mentioned, I'd wake up, I wasn't really sure where I was. When we moved down to Florida, because thankfully the business that we're in and the research side of things, and depending upon, it's so much more flexible now, but it was kind of just becoming a thing to do and be able to do, I could work anywhere. I could live anywhere and just travel to where all my clients were. So actually the reason we're in South Florida, aside from it's drop dead gorgeous, was I was as close to as many airports as possible. So Boca, Delray, Deerfield. I could literally be in Europe in a heartbeat out of Miami. I was a director of research for a broker-dealer out of San Francisco, and I could be there in a heartbeat. I would do day trips to Chicago or New York, and it was just super easy to get anywhere you want from right here. So that's how we wound up here. And also, thankfully, my family's around, so they could help, obviously, with the kids and picking them up, dropping them off wherever they need to be. The U.S. Treasury Department. So obviously, we just went through the Great Recession not too long ago. How many people still feel that pain of what we went through? We were one of only 9 asset management companies that were financial agents for the U.S. Treasury Department. Now, what did that mean? So the Treasury Department had to invest $1 trillion in the U.S. financial system, technically in the global financial system, to make sure we didn't continue to fall off that cliff. And so we had to do all the research, analysis, and warrant analysis for all the companies within that $1 trillion framework. We met with special assistants to the president at the time. We met quarterly in DC to go through and figure out how to get the money back onto Main Street. And these were obviously some serious conversations. There was one specific August that I vividly remember because there were about 90 of us that were called to Washington for one of these specialist sessions. And there was serious conversation around, okay, the depository system is completely broken. Do we need to figure out another way, another system to get the money onto Main Street? And so it was just an amazing kind of time to be seeing how the sausage is built, because sometimes it can get really, really ugly. The other thing, so we were financial agents for the U.S. Treasury Department for 5 years during kind of that whole term. And it was interesting. So from that session, we're like, no, the depository system is not broken. Don't create another system. But then the small business lending program came out kind of right after that, because the TARP program was horrible. Everybody who took money, you're horrible, you're awful, you're going to be marched before Congress. This is not going to work. So let's figure something else out. So we did the small business lending program instead, helped get some money to Main Street, but it was still just absolutely horrible. But that was an amazing time for us, again, networking. So the people I met in DC, I'm still friendly with today. One of them is now running the $450 billion thrift fund in DC. The managers that I met through that process were absolutely amazing. So don't burn bridges. No matter what you're going through, no matter what you want to say to that boss or that colleague that's just not pulling their weight, just really try and take the high road, because down the road, you just never know who you're going to meet, where they're going to be, and whose skills you might need to leverage. When I moved from some of the bulge bracket firms to some of the regional players, I reached back to my Rolodex when we needed people on the trading floor, when we needed different people to run our sales teams. And my prior bosses, who I respected, admired, they were my mentors, I pulled into other positions in firms that I was with. So that goes a long way. And in fact, some of them, because everybody eventually moves to Florida, right? So now we're still friendly now. They've long since retired, but just keep that in mind. It's so tempting. Go ahead. So Linda, right? The funny thing is I did, but it was from a distance. Yeah, I know. But I'm sure because I literally at one point, I was on CNBC almost every month. So I just hope she saw me. Oh, yeah. I just still wonder about that. So I have this up here because of that value integrity side. Yes?
So you mentioned that you were on CNBC and said that you learned how to talk in sound bites. How do you really take that into consideration when being interviewed? How do you talk in sound bites?
Yes, very good question. A few skills that you learn, and I'll say it's also from the political side, not that I ever really want to be a politician, but a few things to consider. With CNBC, it's a little different than, well, it's a lot different than NPR, but other organizations that I've interviewed with. They kind of give you a framework, but when you're asked questions, you don't know what those questions are, okay? So the tip I would suggest is you go in there, you go into the interview with some points you want to make, no matter what the question is. So that's kind of the political angle, because you're like, did they actually answer that question? And they didn't, but then all of a sudden you're like, well, what was that question? I have no idea. But so talking in the sound bites to try to deliver your message, because it literally, the time you have on CNBC might be a minute and a half. So you need to be super pithy at every point in time, because most often on those types of shows, you're being pitted a kind of a bull and a bear, or kind of which angle you're going to take, and you need to firmly make sure you're in that sleeve. Does that help? You don't want to be taken out of context. So I got very good with literally seeing the phrase before I'd say it. And so the other tip I would share with you, I was so director of research at one of the firms, as well as head of financial institutions group. And no matter how many times I would say to people in meetings, do not write the email if you don't want it to be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. All right. That was the mantra that I tried to teach and implore people to contemplate. And it's the same type of thing. Visualize what that's going to be, because people are going to take it out of context. And is it still okay to say? Yeah. It didn't always work. In fact, I had a boss who was the CEO of one of the broker-dealers. And I don't want to get political, but it's just, he was kind of like Trump in that he's tweeting, right? But my CEO would just send off these emails, and he's California time, and I've got to deal with it in New York time sometimes, and it's just disruptive. So instead of having a normal day, this CEO would send off something, maybe he thought it was inspirational at 2 a.m., I don't know, but now I've got to deal with the fallout the next day. So for one of the Christmas ideas, I didn't do it, but I really thought about it. I was going to give him a keyboard without the send button. Because I just, even though I would tell him, like, you just got to stop doing this. This is horrible. But it was a hard lesson until you started seeing the people in the research field and all the turmoil and that happened with this. Until that really started happening, it didn't really resonate with people.
At what point in your career do you feel like you took or learned or gained the most knowledge about the financial sector and how to properly accumulate wealth for yourself, not just for your clients?
Sure. Great question. So I'd have to say it was, I have a great story on this. So when I moved to the II ranked analyst, and that was at Credit Suisse. It was early, I'll say late 20s, early 30s. And during that time period, so I joined this great team, but how shall I say this? I was a woman in the field banking. When I would go to the conferences, there was like 2 of us, okay, especially in the research field. Other men that came in, we had another team of like 11 at that point. They automatically got promoted or they were brought in as a junior analyst, and I was kind of still, for whatever, in the secretarial pool or whatever, the admin pool. And I was technically an hourly employee. But like I said, I was in the morning at 7, and I wasn't leaving until 11 or 12 at night. So I was making a lot of money, and I was saving it and putting it in the market. But came a point where I was to get a promotion, to go to the VP level. The director of research sat me down, and he's like, you know, you're going to get a pay cut because I'm not hourly anymore. And I'm just like, I remember sitting there thinking, do you think I'm a moron? Like, I'm going to now be in this huge bonus pool that happens with the research analyst. And I remember thinking to myself, would you have said this to my male colleague? I'm like, that's insane. But so that happened kind of during that time period. And then also, I love technology. So I had the freedom and flexibility because I was responsible for so many things on this team of 11 people. I did the weekly, I did the monthly, I did the quarterly, I did the annual report for like 200 banks. And there's no possible way I could be doing that plus covering 30 companies of my own without technology. So I had access to this absolutely amazing guy who could write code and could figure out whatever I actually wanted to do, and I could automate a bunch of stuff, which was absolutely amazing experience. And then, so kind of getting through all that particular time period taught me a ton, and it also taught me one more thing about technology. How many people here do conference calls with their bosses? All right. So my II ranked analyst used to spend a lot of time out in the Hamptons. And we would all kind of gather in his office and reach out to him during the week to figure out, you know, what we were supposed to be doing and kind of just keep tabs and touch base. Kind of as the leader of that little posse, although certainly not the senior person on the team, I sat at his desk and did the conference call. And we would call him. And this one time that we were doing that, he didn't pick up. So we just left a message. Hey, Tom, you know, we're all here waiting for you. Just give us a call back. All right, call you later. And I hang up the phone. So I'm sitting at the desk, and the other 10 people in his office, we just start talking. The phone didn't hang up. So I didn't know this, of course. Monday morning rolls around. Tom walks in the office, and he's like, hey, Jack, how you doing? I'm like, good. And so he goes on to tell me that his phone in the Hamptons picked up the entire conversation. However, because I was the one at his desk, I'm really the loudest and the most clear. And meanwhile, now I'm sweating bullets because I'm like, what could I possibly have said? And I'm thinking, I don't think I said anything bad. Then I'm like, am I going to lose my job? What's going on? So nothing really happened from that, but he put me in jail for like 2 weeks, whatever jail meant. And he was joking about getting me a striped shirt and all this other stuff. But I remember being petrified. Still to this day, whenever I'm on a conference call, I'm like, all right, everybody hang up, I'll call you back. So I absolutely make sure that that line is dead and I'm starting a new call. And I just would, especially now with all the other ways to FaceTime and everything else, you just never know. And again, taking things out of context, I mean, he made a joke of it, but he made me sweat for a few hours before he let me off the hook.
You were obviously in a period where there was a lot of gender inequality, and you were in a lot of rooms where it was predominantly like male dominated. You said it was like you and just maybe one other female participant.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't strike me as anybody who's intimidated by anything. You're very confident about yourself. So what about you helped you just brush all of that off? Because you seem like that didn't bother you.
It didn't really bother me, so thank you for asking that. Growing up, I was a tomboy. I played street hockey, football. I don't know why I didn't break more bones. In fact, it was only later in life that I broke my elbow. But like I was one to like fly down hills. We would like create ramps and jump over stuff. And so from early on, we kind of just, my neighborhood was a lot of guys and boys, and kind of playing on that phrase. It was really only till later on, frankly, when I was at Citigroup, they went through a whole bunch of things, and we had to go, like there was a boom boom room, there were protesters outside of Greenwich Street and stuff, where you start looking back and you're like, huh. Like I didn't really realize it, frankly, at the time. It was just looking back and saying, where is everybody else? Like, why aren't they here too? Were they just discouraged at another age? Like I said, initially, if I really looked at it, I'm like, how did this happen? I mean, when you look at the research analysts on Wall Street, there are not a lot of positions. And for me to be able to accomplish that for certain things, hey, maybe the odds were against me, but frankly, I didn't even know that. But I was not uncomfortable in that situation. And the other thing, too, is, for example, my boss, Tom, he tried to utilize those tools. So my initial entree into the banking on the research side, he actually sent me into the Southeast. So I had the Southeast entire footprint. His thinking, which he told me later on, was the South particularly was not used to seeing a lot of women in the boardroom or a lot of women asking questions. Well, frankly, a lot of women still are not in the boardroom, right? Let's be real. So he sent me down there to kind of do a lot of, my own research and questions. So that Q&A opportunity that I had with a lot of the board people and also the senior management team at a lot of the banks, in his mind, he's like, people are not, they're going to underestimate you. So they're more likely to share more information because they're going to think you're not paying attention. And so he knew how to kind of utilize my skills for, frankly, the advantage of a lot of investors. And it was true because I don't know about you. I mean, people just tell me a lot of information. And it's just kind of casually asking questions, but some people will just like, they just open up everything. Are we almost out? No, okay, all right. And so I was able to share that information with obviously a lot of investors. And over time, it got better, but still when I look at Wall Street, like Sally Krawcheck was at Citigroup at the time, and some of my mentors too were women, but it was just not a lot of them. But, so what I want to point out here is I stayed true to myself, and I moved on and found my way to a different path and stayed on the research path. But it wasn't until probably a good 7 years after I left that space, 7 years, that all of a sudden it became an issue. And I'll just say I was right. The activities that were going on were wrong, but they were getting paid, we were getting paid like ridiculous amounts of money. You got paid on your investment banking deals that you were involved in. You got paid based on the number of phone calls you made. You got paid on the number of trades in your name, and you had this massive grid. Like Grubman and also, God, what is this? Blodgett. Millions and millions of dollars for this. Go ahead.
In spirit, it was on at the banks, or you think that banks are still a little corrupt?
Not really, which I can share with you, partially because of what I went through during the Treasury. And I know what happened, and I know how close we were to it just being awful. And frankly, I have views, really passionate views, about the rating agencies and how they were not, I'll say at all, might be too much, held to a higher standard, because they are largely to blame for a lot of, they were getting paid for ratings too. They were, I mean, it was incredible what was going on there as well. So there's a lot more blame to go around, but they were the poster child, and frankly, they were the ones with the capital. So they could get penalized and pay billions of dollars in penalties. But Grubman sat 4 doors away from me at Citigroup. So I remember he was one of the people that wrote the research, that wrote the press releases for AT&T. One time, he was on the 7:30 call, but he was so big that he didn't have to go down to the trading floor. He could do it from his office. Exactly. He talked about something that was not even out yet. And that's eventually how he initially got caught on that one call. And then obviously Blodgett and Mary Meeker on the, kind of the internet stocks. And that's the thing, right? So all of a sudden, there's emails coming out where they're like, bye, not emails, the research reports are like, bye, this is awesome, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And then meanwhile, there's an email, not so much. Exactly. Right. And so those types of things started to resonate with some of the people that were on my team. But still, some people were still like, oh, that'll never happen to me. But definitely something to think about. So I love this one. So, you know, it's kind of like that cartoon or something where they're knocking, you know, it's opportunity at the front door and you're out in the back taking the garbage out or something like that. You know, who's here for their dreams? It's calling. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? How are you going to make that happen? So kind of the sheet that I asked them, you know, kind of to pass out on the way in are for you to think about your goals. There are certainly some things that we need to do right now to pay the bills, to pay the rent, to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. That's a certainty. But what do you want to do longer term? Whether it's 1 to 2 years, that will kind of help you with those next steps to get you to that longer term goal. And then the other thing, kind of as I was putting this together, was sometimes it's really hard to figure out, like, what is my dream? What do I really want to do? Because recently, as I was going through some stuff, I kind of was very fortunate. I got through things in my career and directions in research. Director of research, I didn't even want that job. But that's another story. But I was then at the pillar of what I could do on the research side, and I was 32. And then I'm like, all right, now what do I do? And frankly, that job wasn't for me because while I'm a people person, I am not a high maintenance person, I found out. So as director of research, I was shocked at what people will ask for. They would come into just that kind of that whole entitlement type of a thing. So I realized that HR, definitely not for me. But just think about the type of person you are, what really resonates for you. Most often we're promoted above our skill set, right? Kind of the general thought. You're really, really good at this, so you must be great at that. And then all of a sudden you're like, this is horrible. I'd much rather be doing what I was doing before. So those types of kind of disciplines are important. And the other thing too, kind of like all of you are doing right now with the programs that you're in, every year I do some sort of educational component for me. There are certainly requirements that I need to do from my accreditation side and from the things on that side of the equation, but I always look out there and figure out what's next. What is the industry doing? What can I deliver to my clients? What do I really need to learn? And for me, based on kind of my business cycle, I really can only do that like April, May, June, July. And then it kind of just gets a little too crazy to fit too much else in. But the good thing is the education system has become so flexible that you can do a lot of stuff online. You can kind of squeeze some things in when you have it, which is awesome. So I would just wanted to share with you kind of what I do. And I really believe that that never ends. I'm always going to be out there trying to look for that next thing, what's happening here. Like right now, frankly, based on all the finance stuff that I do, and kind of some of the freaky things that I see happening, I'm looking for kind of like a behavioral finance type of a thing. Because despite what might seem really rational in the market, especially as a fundamental research analyst, all of a sudden some really wacky things happen. We obviously have technical trading, momentum trading, and all that other stuff. And you have this psychological behavior behind all that of even though something seems completely out of the realm of thinking for people to do, there's a herd mentality. And even though you can see that cliff, it's coming, they're just running there with all of their might. And so that kind of stuff baffles me a little bit. But definitely take a look at that. And here's, if you really have no idea, obviously kind of the MBA program, MS, different master's programs that are going on, and also the volunteering, as I mentioned. And I definitely have the mantra of, why not? If it's out there and you're interested in trying it, give it a go, and just take that risk, take that chance, take that opportunity to figure out, to meet that extra person. I don't know, how many people are a little intimidated by networking? You walk into a room full of people and it's a little, right? Yeah. It can really be intimidating to walk into a group of individuals where you might know no one or a few people. And so from a networking perspective, another tip, I moved down here, but I was still on the institutional side of the business, and I was traveling back to New York like every other week, or Chicago, or San Francisco. And then when I joined Bell Rock Capital, I was still technically on the institutional side because we actually work with a lot of banks and manage their portfolios for them. But then at some point in time, I realized I'm doing some more business to business, and now I'm also probably need to meet some local people. And oh, by the way, I know where Publix is, and I know where the beach is, and the airports, but I don't really know about my community. So that's when I started getting it. Right away, actually, my mom had suggested I join the Junior League of Boca Raton. So I did that, which was awesome because the Junior League is 700 women in this town, and all of a sudden you have some familiar faces, which is awesome. Through actually the Junior League, one of the networking kind of done in a day opportunities, I got to know about the local Boca Chamber. And I'm like, what's a chamber? So the woman there, near and dear to my heart, Kate Volman, she told me all about this. And then, so from a networking side, the best thing, and this is a really good tip, definitely don't go in handing out your cards, right? Rule number 1, don't do that. Rule number 2, always take interest in the person you're talking to. Don't just go right into your spiel, okay? And also about your spiel. Like I mentioned, I do certain educational things every year. This past summer session, well, actually I did a few things, but one of them was the Master Storyteller Academy. And I'm not sure if there's a class kind of here, but maybe we can get him actually in for a speaker because he's amazing. And it goes something like this. Never tell a story without making a point, and never make a point without telling a story. It's much better when you're going through your interview or going through your networking opportunity to tell them a little bit about what makes you different. What experience did you have at that last job that makes you stand out from the person right next to them that might be doing the same thing? What is it that resonates? What's that one thing that you can leave with them? You know, it is that 30-second, you've got one floor, you know, to kind of make an impact. What is that going to be? And there's actually some other information I can share on the storytelling side. During the interview process, when I was at the bulge bracket firms in New York, we used to hire out of the Ivy Leagues. I mean, kind of that was the thing you did. And however, what started happening really quickly was that the people that we were interviewing had that entitlement. And they literally you'd feel it, like they just like wanted your seat immediately. Like 6 months, am I gonna have the corner office? Like how long is that gonna take, you know? And so you just didn't get the feel that they would roll up their sleeves and get dirty and figure out what needed to be done and take that extra effort and that entrepreneurial effort. So we started at that point hiring from our local business schools. It was New York, NYU at the time. But also you have, from a standout perspective, when you go into those interviews, don't just repeat your resume. When somebody says, tell me about yourself, and they kind of put the resume on the desk, don't timeline it. Don't say blah, blah, blah. Tell them the story about what made that experience really great. Or maybe that one not so awful while you're looking for something new. You know, so think about it in a very different manner because that's going to make you stand out from everyone else. And the other thing, too, that somebody recently was telling me, he does a lot of interviewing now, was make sure when they say, so do you have any questions for me? That you do. Because they were sharing with me that they don't get a lot of that. And so that can present an awkward situation. Did you have a question? Oh, no, okay. So we're about out. All right. Ooh, well, there you go. No, actually. Well, I wanted to get to that last slide. Here's kind of those tips. And then, oops, damn. Here are my logos. So Credit Suisse, Merrill, First Boston. Maybe it's really Brian, Beck, and Janney. And then I also put in here, just so you know, all the nonprofits are where I volunteered, not where I worked. So thank you.
Please join me in thanking Jackie.
Thank you.
And And thank you so much for volunteering here tonight with us.
Thank you.
You guys have a great weekend. Thank you again, and we'll see you next week.